Hey there, aspiring horror authors. It's another episode of Sako and the Moon, created by two self-published horror authors. S.A. Bradley is a horror author and podcaster best known for his show Hellbent for Horror, where he explores the emotional and cultural significance of the genre. His book, Screaming for Pleasure: How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy, blends personal stories, film analysis, and genre history to highlight the positive impact of horror. Bradley's work emphasizes the cathartic and meaningful aspects of fear, showing how horror connects with audiences on a deep level. He is a strong advocate for the genre, celebrating its role in both entertainment and personal growth through fear and storytelling. Okay, I am Sako Toomey, artist and author and a bunch of other things, but I'll just mention that I'm self-published 4 times over.
4 times now.
4 times now.
It's 4 times.
I've been working on my craft for decades, and now I'd like to share my skills with you guys.
And I'm literally the guy in the middle. You know why I continue to do that? Because it frustrates Sako to no end, and that's why I can't be a good co-host if I don't frustrate my other half. I am the one, El Hearn, more affectionately known as the Moon. I am the doer of things, as we all are. We are the doer of things, the wearer of all hats, and I'm so excited because we get to have someone that I consider a really, really good friend to me. We get S.A. Bradley here on the show. Hey, Scott, what's up?
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. Thanks so much. What a kind opening, and what a long press kit I've given you guys. That's just a great reminder that I need to edit that motherfucker up. Oh, can we swear? I guess is the first thing.
Fuck yeah.
Yes.
I just started right up out of the gate there. But yeah, it sounds a lot more heady than I think I really am. So it's also great deception on that. But it's wonderful to be here. It's good to be around friends these days.
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to have good friends that do what you do in the genre that you love. And that's one of the reasons why it was so kind. Like, I found it so kind to have like such a wonderful horror community welcome me in as the newbie. You and James and Don, and you guys have been doing this for so long, and I just barely got my toes wet in the field of horror. So it's great having you as part of my horror community, and that's a writing friend and cohort. One of the reasons why I'm so glad that you're here on this show, and we get to talk about all kinds of things. I met you initially when you did a reading at Butcher Cabin Books, a very entertaining reading. And, you read a piece that is so dear to me for so many reasons, primarily a story that we'll get into later on. But you were also a guest at Imaginarium. We talk about Imaginarium all the time. And that is when I picked up a copy of
Yay.
And I haven't gotten super deep into it, but I love what I've read so far. And one of the things that I'm such a fan of when it comes to you is that you are an absolute wealth of knowledge. I tell people, we talk about you all the time, to be honest. And I tell anybody, if you want to just sit with someone who just off the top of their head can pull all kinds of horror history and knowledge, like this, S.A. Bradley is the person you want to sit with. What is it that draws you into having to just all the knowledge that you have? Like what makes you want to do all that deep research and all the learning and just get into the nitty gritty of things, the bare bones of horror?
Boy, I don't know. Part of me wants to say it's just genetic, that's how I started out with baseball cards and whatever else is in front of me, and anything that really excites me, I go right to obsession, it seems like. Nice. But I think part of it is repression. When I was a kid, I was in a religious fundamentalist cult that thought the world was going to end in 1975. So it was a doomsday cult with numerology and all that stuff. And they poured over every word in the Bible and came up with some pseudo intellectual stuff that made it all seem sensible all the time. So I was brought up in a world where there was self-congratulatory debate, where essentially everybody was, why I call it pseudo-intellectual is it's exactly the kind of thing that I'm having to live through right now, which is where people just say, do the research. They've done research, but they've done research in one specific place, one specific source. And because they have something that is, most of the time it's half-truths, there's just enough truth that they jump into that and they hold on. So I grew up in that kind of thing where I've been fighting for a conversation my whole life, but it's also part of how I make friends, and it's also just how I've learned how to coexist with people. So once I had to fight for anything that I liked, I had to defend, and it's been that way with punk rock, heavy metal, horror, just reading in certain parts of the country. Just reading is considered an affront, and so where I grew up, that was kind of the thing. And so when I found what I loved, and I was kind of isolated from everybody because of this kind of stuff, I found that I just went deep into it. It helped me calm down in some ways. I found that I was a very scared kid, scared of everything. They helped put a lot of fear in me, and surviving horror movies was like one badge of honor at a time. And I realized not everything was going to kill me. And I realized that what I was hearing wasn't the only thing that was out there in the world. I got a much larger worldview through things that I was seeing in horror movies, weirdly enough.
And that's one of the things that, I can't speak for Sako, but one of the things I enjoy about horror is that it helps you to explore the dark side of things that no one wants to actually encounter. And you get to kind of experience your fears in the safest way possible. And that's one of the things I love about watching, like consuming horror, and also in writing and making horror.
Yeah, it's an arm's length kind of thing.
Yeah.
You're safe at an arm's length.
And it's like, oh, I can see what happens if we go the right path versus the left path, and I don't have to actually experience it. I mentioned meeting you at a convention where a whole lot's going on. There's a whole lot of people, and we got our cliques. There's a group of people that you're always with. What draws you to convention life and being in conventions? What draws you to that space?
Oh, well, the ability to be able to communicate with people who are like me. I spent a lot of my life not having people that I could talk to in confidence until, I hit my mid-teens and stuff like that. Things started to change quite a bit with my rebellion. But for a long time, I was isolated. With horror conventions especially, there's just this ability to be in a world where what's inside of my head, I get to actually say. And I find it that I'm surrounded by like-minded people. We use that term a lot. We might be people that we normally wouldn't mix if we were outside of conventions, might not even meet. But we go to conventions and we have this possibility. To me, the reason I'm in all of this is because I realized that I hadn't spoken about what I was passionate about for a long time. And I had all this stuff just burning up inside of me. So I ended up going to a convention, and I thought it was going to be the worst thing in the world. And first day it was, because it was exactly what I thought it was going to be, just people, buying stuff and not talking. But I found the right people. And when I did, I realized that I wasn't alone, that there was a very healthy vein of coal, essentially gold in this world, that were people who talk like this. And I just found that I could be myself. And there's something about myself and my friends, my close friends in horror, consider ourselves archivists in a weird way, that we have all of this information and we are bubbling not to hoard it, but to give it out. So it's like when we meet, it's like, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Have you seen this? This is why this is important. And we do that, and the conversation just grows. You mentioned something really interesting about horror being this thing where you are safe to be able to do this. And it's one of those very primal things. It's also very universal, that we all in this world feel somewhat under the 8 ball at certain points, and horror gives us this release. Comedy and horror are kind of like two sides of the same Janus coin, right? And I always say the comedy is where you're watching someone get away with something you could never get away with. It relieves tension that way. And horror is watching someone go through something you'd never want to go through. Both of those allow you to have that release that we need, a primal scream therapy safely. And so when I go to horror conventions, I find people who have gone through some shit and are out the other side, and somehow the thing that got them through was the thing that most people wouldn't go to. Most people would go to musicals and happy stuff, and we go to the dark side, and somehow that's like, it did not kill me. I feel stronger. I understand the world a little bit. It's not giving me glad handing and sugarcoating. Horror tells me, what you're feeling, here's a metaphor for it. This is really rough stuff. We're not going to tell you the world's fair. We're not going to tell you the world's nice. And it comes to me straightforward that way. And then it says, hey, guess what? You survived.
That
nicely put.
This is one of the reasons why I love you, dude. When I talk about you, this is exactly what I'm always talking about. Like, there's always something enriching when I talk to you, and I appreciate you so much for that. So we're going to give you a chance at the very end to, push and promote whatever it is that you want to push and promote. But since I brought up conventions, I know there's a couple coming up at the beginning part of next year. Do you have any other appearances that, let's say, starting tomorrow or whatever, into however long? Do you have any other conventions that are your appearances you're going to be making?
Well, for this year, I'm done with doing appearances. I just got back from Cleveland. I just got back from St. Louis, weirdly enough. I was at a film festival for a director named Jess Franco. And he's done like 200 crazy movies. So we went there to support a friend who is working with Severin Films. And they're putting out a bunch of Jess Franco movies, as well as some documentaries about him. And so we were there to support that and to talk to horror fans about this really weird director who, in his time period, didn't get a lot of love, but since then has kind of become a cult figure. In the upcoming year, March 27th, I'm going to be in Williamsburg, Virginia. It's the beginning of AuthorCon, which goes over that weekend. But we're going to have I wouldn't call it a festival. It's a charity event with authors who are going to be reading from their books. It's called Spirited Giving. I've done it the last couple of years. One of our good friends, James Sabata, is kind of in charge of that. There's also other people, Scares That Care, that's involved in it. And Brian Keene is a big name in there. And I'm going to be the MC, so I didn't do bad enough last year. So we'll see if maybe this year I can really get it a little bit crazier. I'll be in, yes, that book, Shadows in the Stacks, is one of the anthology books that came out of the charity that we're doing, Spirited Giving. I've been in a couple. There was one before that called Splinters and Shadows. Is that it? I forget.
Something like that. I can't
Good
remember.
God. It's terrible. I can't remember.
Yeah,
Shadows and Splinters, I think. But that one has a great story. Oh, well, a great story. I'm talking about my stories. But it's a story that, because it's out of print now, people can't really get. So I'm going to put an anthology of my short stories together and have that out, hopefully, in this upcoming year.
One, just for the sake of telling people about the charity, this was for the book's Unbanded initiative through the Library Foundation SD. Spirited Giving in 24 was held in San Diego.
Yes. And
they were, fight against, banned books. Because why would we ban books? Like, does anyone ever read Fahrenheit 451? Like, has anyone? Yeah. Anyway.
Yes.
Irony.
But yeah, no, I wanted, this was actually pushed by James Sabata earlier today on his socials. And so I wanted to make sure I highlighted this as well. This is still available, and you're in this book.
Yeah, there's some great stories in there. The mission statement
giving this year or next year.
The mission statement for that book, Shadows in the Stacks, was that we were to come up with a story that it was based on something that could get banned. So come up with something that was somewhat controversial, something that was inflammatory, something that is debatable in the news, and that many you mentioned Fahrenheit 451 and other books like that. It's important to remember that all of those books, whether they're read or not now, which is sometimes the crying shame, they were all cries of anger that came from something that was happening that was an injustice. Most of the time it ended up being where people's rights are being taken away or the censorship was starting to show up. One of my favorite things is Harlan Ellison's edited book volumes called Dangerous Visions and Again Dangerous Visions. And now there was just the newest one, which is Final Dangerous Visions, done posthumously after he died. They finally got those out. But he got in touch with all of his friends back in the late 60s who were trying to get stories put in magazines, and the magazines were doing shadow banning, essentially, back in that time. It just, we can't have that in there and stuff like that. Like Ray Bradbury had a story about Jesus coming off the cross to tell everybody, you know, he's pulling himself off and bleeding all over the place and telling people what shits they are. And of course, that's Ray, who's a really nice guy, but he did do Fahrenheit 451. So Ellison took a really big chance. He said, I want all of the stories that got pushed away that are not able to get published. We're going to put them all in one book, and we're going to make it about that. We're going to dare them to get rid of it. And so it's become one of the seminal pieces of his work. If you read it, it's dated in many ways because a lot of these things are from a time period. Some of it is like, oh, that ship is sailed. There was one about news being manufactured for terrible purposes of political advancement. And here we are. So, I think books like this and Spirited Giving, they have an important role to play in stuff like that. So I'm very happy to be part of it. I won't be in the next one because I know that they get tired of having the same authors. They want to give everyone a chance. So I'll be rolling into something else.
That was most. You had this. Was there anything you wanted to talk about the story of blunt force trauma that you had in this? Do you want to tell people what this was about?
Oh, sure. So I was asked if I could contribute to this, and so I wanted to do a story that is kind of about the gun culture and kind of about the coldness of revenge. So I have a character who was beaten nearly to death in a robbery that he just kind of walked into the convenience store to get cigarettes and ended up getting a crowbar into his skull and nearly died. And we're with him as he's gone through recovery and has gone to all sorts of rehabs and psychiatrists and stuff like that. But nobody knows, because he's playing a perfectly good role, that he's just counting the days till he can kill this guy when he finally gets out of prison. And so the idea is that he's going to go and shoot this guy. He's gotten himself a Saturday night special, and he has learned nothing, essentially. All he's done is survive, and his whole thing is to kill this guy. And so he goes to get this guy. It doesn't go exactly as planned, and he is part of the damage that happens. He shoots himself in the leg while he's struggling with the gun, and he does eradicate this guy, but he shoots himself. And the rest of the story is him trying to make it back to his place, and the bullet's moving. The wound continues to move. The wound starts opening in different parts of his body. And we're not sure if that's actually what's happening or if it's his mind doing kind of like a telltale heart thing. But the idea is that these wounds do not heal. And there is no justification or vengeance that's going to work. It takes more than one person down when you go down that path of vengeance, and just the idea of the proliferation of weapons, really. And so all of that being done in hopefully the most entertaining way possible without putting a mallet on anybody's head. But I love making it because people writhe in their seats when he's trying to get this bullet out, and it's like doing a little bit of a prairie dog on him.
Speaking of circumstances where people kind of moving around in their seats uncomfortably.
Sorry.
Listen, I can't tell this story enough times. And I will forever tell this story because it's just so damn funny. So many things happen surrounding this one particular event. And there's the situation with Dawn and being mistaken for some other guy who won an award. That all happened in the same night as this wonderful reading of your story, Primordial Soup. And it always gets brought up because it happened at Sako's room party at Imaginarium a couple years ago. So I've told this story from my point of view. I think actually Sako's told this story also. So how about you recall, because I left halfway through the fun parts of this story.
Wow.
Because there's the story, there's your reading, and then there's the reading that took place afterwards.
Oh yeah.
That you guys told me about, and I'm still jealous of anyone who was there because I'm so mad I missed it. So how about you recount the reading of Primordial Soup at the room party?
Well, I'm pretty sure I was egged on by James Sabata. I don't remember exactly.
Probably.
Some of the details have blurred over the years, but it hadn't been published yet. It was an open manuscript. It was just a bunch of pieces of paper, but it pretty much was done. And I don't remember if I was sending it to him or not, but I did send it to him, and I sent it to Vince Vainakava, another writer, a horror writer. And I knew I had something because he's pretty extreme and pretty gross himself in his writing. He's more comical than I am. And he wrote me, he said, dude, this one scene made me gag. And I said, yes. All right. If I made you gag, then I've done all right. And so we were at this place at Imaginarium, and it was my first time there. And I was still kind of feeling like a left shoe in a right shoe world. And we were at this party, and it just felt like it needed a little bit of spice, I guess, some energizing. It was certainly going well, but it needed something. And so I'm surrounded by these gorgeous people. I'm feeling very flirtatious. And all of a sudden I'm like, you know what? I got this story. And James is like, oh, you're going to do you got to do Primordial Soup. And he's like, I do it just so I laugh in the corner. He goes, because you don't know the crowd here. I said, yeah.
And I remember I was getting ready to leave, right? I told some people I was going to be somewhere else. And I was like, oh yeah, hey, I'm going to go get rid. And then James was like, hold on. Scott's going to read Primordial Soup. I'm like, oh, well, let me sit my little happy ass down because I heard this once. I got to hear it again because it's such an off the wall. Like, the thing about Primordial Soup is that when it starts, where you are when it starts is not just anywhere close to where you are when it ends. And it's such an interesting ride. Like, imagine being in a car and you're on a road that goes left and right and you end up going up. And that's how I feel about listening to Primordial Soup. So tell us the rest. That's what made me stay for the first half. So you do the reading. Go ahead.
So that's funny because I remember the first time that you heard it was when I did a live reading of it at Butcher Cabin Books in Louisville.
It was the day before, yeah.
Yeah, so it was like the day before, and I did it there, and there were a lot of really good stories there, and I wasn't sure how this was going over, and Moon's on the floor there, and he's just like going, that's the greatest fucking thing I've ever heard. And I'm like, I was like, wow, okay. So I guess that worked. I wasn't sure, I'm in Kentucky for the first time. People are polite, but what are they thinking? That kind of thing. And so I'm in this small indie bookstore, and I'm like, well, it's a bookstore, so it should be pretty progressive, but I have no idea what passes for progressive in Louisville, Kentucky.
That's fair.
So having, the story go where it goes, which is somewhat confrontational sexually. I wasn't sure how that, and not traditional sexually. People love confrontational sex as long as it's very straight and cis. But this ain't that. This is not. It doesn't go there. So that was where I was like going, well, we'll find out real quick. I'll be back here at any given time. So that was one thing, but going to this convention, Imaginarium, and I will say that I met some really great people and a lot of people who were on my wavelength, but I also met a few that were not. And there was a few people who were rather vocal about how not like me they were. And so when I was spending some time in this party room, I was like, well, I know how I can empty this place out a little bit. And so, it might have been getting a little too crowded. But so I decided I was going to read this, and I had a hard time not laughing because I realized what I was saying. And I was like going, these people don't know me. Like Sako and Morgan, this is their room, and they're having a party. And here's this guy who's coming up talking some real filth.
Hey, we pushed you up there. Like,
yeah. And so it was funny. I was watching people kind of like first intrigued, not sure where the story's going. And then I bring in something that people, have a lot of fantasies about, mer people. And so you see people kind of leaning in. You're seeing some traditional folk that you would see in the heavy metal and goth world. And they're holding their girlfriends, and they're semi kind of getting a little bit frisky, turned on from the words that are happening. And then the hammer. All sorts of hammers start to drop, and I'm watching the faces go from like a smile to like this rictus of terror and discomfort, and people like kind of nauseous, and others just kind of like politely wanting to get me, arrested, but they're too polite to do anything about it. And so at the end, there's applause and everything. And some people are like, first off, one of the things that I forget all the time is that one person is like moaning, like it really hits them hard. And every so often I would say something, I hear, whoa. And I'd be like, is that nausea or what? That sounds like it's not nausea. And so the person came up afterwards, shall be remain nameless. I don't remember who it was anyway, but she would not let me go. She's like, can I hug you? And she's like embracing me like, a crab. And I was like, wow, okay, that's one side of it. And then the other side is this girl's looking at her boyfriend. She goes, let's go to the room. And he goes, you better not be turned on that. Like, just out loud in the entire room. And they're like, damn, people had to profess how distasteful it was. They had to let me know that this was not their jam. And that was okay. But what was funny afterwards, that there was like this little literary exorcism that happened. Some guy gets up and he decides he's got to read from the Book of Ruth.
It was the Book of Ruth.
He's going to read from the Book of Ruth, but in a Scottish accent. And he wouldn't look at me. And he was like doing these hand gestures. It was literally like the power of Christ compels you. The power of Christ compels you. And it was just the funniest thing watching everybody give equal time. And it was just this, it was crazy
I was aghast, not at your story, but at his.
Yeah.
And I was like,
yeah, it was like a prayer group kind of thing just suddenly happened. And I was like going, yeah, I look what I did. I brought the nations of religions together. I'm a uniter. It was just very funny. I'm just standing there telling my story, and it was so incendiary, although I didn't think it was, that if he was compelled to get up and start quoting Bible scriptures and to have a mass right there in the room. So
I left right after your reading because I stuck around to hear your reading, and you and James hit me back like the next day. It's like, oh, Moon, you left too soon. If only you knew what happened after you left.
The story after the story is, the story after the story is one of the reasons to go to conventions. I love being at the bar at 3:00 in the morning and going, dude, you left too early. This is what happened. Almost every convention I go to, people hold their civility to a certain time period. And then around midnight, people start losing their shit. And that's when some of the great stories happen.
It's absolutely, and the one fun thing I always talk about with Imaginariums, there's this couch at the corner where the lobby meets, like in hell. And that couch is a really good meeting spot. But it's not just a good meeting spot, but it's a really good place for conversation. And you and I have had the opportunity to sit down and really have some really good talks together. And our first real one-on-one talk, one-on-one, but Laura was there as well, was over ice cream. So I'm going to ask you this question in front of everybody. What's your favorite flavor of ice cream?
Vanilla.
Honestly, very few people appreciate, I guess because of some particular lifestyle connotations of the word vanilla, people don't appreciate how good and simple
Oh yeah,
vanilla ice
good
cream.
vanilla bean, right? When
Yeah.
it's not just that creamy stuff, but when it's good vanilla. Oh, we're used to having it as the start, right? It's like the neutral palate thing, and then you put
Yeah.
on the peanuts and the chocolate. And I'm great with those sundaes and stuff, but if I can get a good scoop of vanilla ice cream,
Quality vanilla. It
yeah,
really is good.
yeah,
I just
I
asked for some from my husband in the shopping list.
sometimes like, it's like, what? I just give me some good vanilla. Just a really good vanilla.
yep.
But that's one of the reasons why I love talking to you, man. You are a wealth of knowledge, and you are a great conversation. And I look forward to seeing you next July
Yeah,
at
yeah.
Imaginarium 25.
I can't not go now. It's weirdly enough, it's my birthday. It seems like all the time. It can't continue that way. It's just
I
these
mean,
times. But
I forget what the
but
dates
I'm
are for next year. We'll look into that. But no, it's going to be a great thing. I'm gonna have to. There's something I want to ask you about. We'll ask you about after the show, but about Imaginarium 25. But that's most of what I personally have as far as question wise. Now I'm going to turn it over to Sako with her set of questions.
Oh dear, here we go. Now it
Awesome.
gets spicy.
Now, well, not spicy, but I'm gonna try and get into some of the deeper thoughts on the genre. What initially sparked your passion for horror, and how did it influence your decision to become an author?
Well, it started because I was in this world that was kind of unsafe. My childhood wasn't very safe, and it was partially this crazy religion, and part of it was just mental instability with parts of my family. And so I was a very scared kid, and I had a big imagination around that stuff. And what ended up happening was something that I call the first kiss with horror. In my book and on my podcast, I talk about what was the first thing that really excited you. It's not the first movie you saw, but it's the one that kind of got under your skin and made you have to go back again and again, whether for a good reason or a bad reason. Like first kisses are not always good, but even with them not being good, you always want to have another. And so for me, it was my parents were going through a terribly crazy, violent divorce in the midst of the world allegedly ending. And they completely ignored that I even existed. And so I ended up watching TV I shouldn't have been watching. This was back when the home box office was just starting out. And so it was kind of free at that point. I was in the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia area, and they were doing a trial of it for like 8 hours a day, just running these movies. And we were in that area where you could do that trial. And I ended up watching a movie that essentially helped me. It wasn't the storyline exactly like what was happening in my life, but it was the themes that were happening in my life. Obviously, I didn't get that as a kid. I was 8 years old, but upon reflection, I understand why it attacked me so hard. It was a movie called Don't Look Now. And in the beginning, these parents are not attending to their children. One of them drowns, and it's done in a very stylistic way, very scary, not shot like any other horror film I had seen at that time, which is like normally 50s black and white giant ant movies. And so this one had real emotions, and it showed a father crying and all of this stuff. And what I got out of it was, first I went into shock. And for 3 nights I had nightmares, and then I had to watch it again. I had to sneak in and watch it again. But what I got out of it was that your parents can't save you. Your parents may not always be there. And it was a scary message, but it was this message which was ringing true to me. And so that somehow helped me feel not alone. And I guess that was the thing that horror did for me. I had all these feelings in me and nowhere for them to go. And suddenly horror allowed me to have that. I was able to release this stuff in some way. And how that happens, I have no clue. But what I realized was that I felt stronger after that. And if I started to like share the disease a little bit with friends, I'd say, here, read this or whatever. I started getting into books. Alfred Hitchcock Presents. He had these anthologies of old stories. So one was Spellbinders and Suspense, and it had things like The Wendigo in it and The Upper Berth, and all these classics that I knew nothing about. The Most Dangerous Game. and I'm reading these, and my dad has no clue that I'm reading them, and it's helping expand my life. And release this great fear. I get to do what I think a lot of readers do, which is, this world is rough. I need a place to escape it. I need a place to feel comfortable. I need to see other people going through whatever it is that they're going through, and at times that has to do with the books. So it became part of me being into horror, and my family thought it was cute, right, or funny at a certain point. And that was fine, and when I was a teenager, some people were into it, most people weren't, and that was fine. But I was reading a lot. King and guys like that were big. I had always been writing because my escape was writing, and some of the things were writing stuff that I would never want to have anybody else see. It was just screaming of, like, I wish I wasn't here kind of stuff. And then it started being stories, and it was rip-offs of every story I ever read. Nothing original for many, many years. And then I just started keeping them. And when I was in English class in like 7th grade, I think that was the first time a teacher went, "Wow, this is really fun." And before that, I had a little bit of encouragement too. I used to make ditto. You remember what ditto sheets were? Where they would. So ditto sheets were before there were photocopiers. There was just you'd have this one. What do you call it? Master test. And they put it on this big rolling cylinder, and it was kind of like a printing press, and it had this purplish kind of ink in there, and they would just run off, like however many people were in the class, that's how many there were, but they would give it to you. It'd still be a little bit wet, and you could sniff it and get a little high. So it was like this really strange stuff. But ditto sheets were one-sided. You couldn't do both sides.
Right.
So the other side was always blank, and I'd be bored, and I would just draw cartoons. So I would do this thing called Dr. Death, and there was a skull with a little hat, and somebody would light a candle, and the guy would appear underneath the hat, and he'd tell a story, and it would be terrible, 4 frames worth of it, and the candle's burning down. At the end, the candle burns out, and he turns back into a skull. And I was like selling those for like a penny when I would make those for people. So I that was the most money I ever made, by the way, as a writer, was when I was doing that back in like 3rd grade. But yeah, it became a thing where I loved telling stories. I was able to tell decent stories. And after that, it just started to be more essays and stuff like that, because I didn't have a lot of confidence in the writing style. I was better at writing things in a very academic way in some places. And then it started to really become more vocal and more of my voice when I started doing the podcast, because the podcast is essays, essentially. I have interviews, but I most of the time try to do audio essays around whatever is happening in the world, and 2 or 3 movies that talk to that.
That's amazing. Speaking of your podcast, as the host of Hellbent for Horror, how does discussing horror films and stories shape or inspire your own writing?
It inspires it a lot, because I have to watch a lot of things and I'm a habitual movie watcher anyway. Like I said, my friends and myself call ourselves archivists. You don't do that with like 2 or 3 movies. You've got thousands of movies that you've watched over the years, and they become part of your imagination. I think all writing comes from stimulus. You need to get out in the world. You need to read. You need to watch things, but you need to experience. And so the podcast is usually me having to pay attention. What's going on in the world, what excites me, what interests me, because I'm 130 episodes in, right? So that's since 2016. You can't talk about Jaws all those times, right? So you gotta come up with something else. And if it was just movies that I like, then it would be a boring conversation. I like to try and find myself rolling into stuff that I just heard about, or things that are happening that are topical. So we talk about movies, sure, but I also had a couple episodes that were about satanic panic or satanic music and what it was thought of as that. And that requires me, because I'm me, I need to debate, right? I have to be ready for debate since I was a child. So I do a lot of research and I go down rabbit holes with this. And so it was very good at keeping me enriched. And so everything that I'm doing, there are parts of the book that have inspired podcast episodes, and there are podcast episodes that inspire chapters in the book. And there, when it comes to fiction, that comes from some of my friends' stories, and it comes from me thinking about the movies in a different manner. So it's not, is it good? Is it bad? I'm usually looking at, like, I'll have something about, say, fascism. We'll just say fascism. And I did one a couple of years ago called There Be Tigers. And it took a couple different movies, but one of the things that I took in was the movie The Tenant by Roman Polanski, and how in that movie he's really talking about the silent fascism of the people who are not in charge that help the person who's in charge be the fascist. Mm-hmm. And so without using the term fascism once in the podcast, because I didn't want to go down that path, I just used all these different stories. There was one about, there's a documentary called Tickled, where it was about the tickling fetish and how somebody was using kink shaming to create essentially slaves. Now, people that would do their very bidding, lest they be found out to be in these videos, getting their feet tickled and orgasming over it. And so using all these things of how we hold each other down with this oppressive kind of nature got me thinking about different story ideas. So I'm watching these movies, but I'm not looking at them as a straightforward thing of, here's a guy going in and he's a tenant in this house and everybody hates him in this apartment building and it seems like he's paranoid, or is it actually happening? Instead of just going there, it's like, I want to know why they're paranoid. For me, the big thing with horror, and horror gets knocked around a lot with what the definition is. I have a very loose definition. I think it's very subjective. What scares me might not scare you. What scares you might put me in a coma. Who knows? It's so, because it's so subjective, it has to be about more than that. And I look at it as something that horrifies you, terrifies you, makes you full of dread. And then it's why. The question that comes up in horror is, why is this person trying to do this to me? Why, out of all the different ways that they could tell a story, did they decide they needed to go here, and why did I read it? And that why is what I think is important about storytelling, and why is what's important about being a reader. And nothing is more political than saying, I do it just for entertainment. Oh, it's just an entertaining piece. It means nothing. Horse shit. Everything that you put down on paper comes from something, because you need to grab somebody. What are you going to do? Say, there's a white piece of paper, they're all eating vanilla ice cream and they're just sitting around, and then a nondescript thing attacks them and they kind of run and then they don't. Is that your story? Everything comes from whatever's happening in the world. And it can be, even if it's the most inept thing. In fact, I like to say that if you want to know what pissed off any generation, look at their trash films. Look at their movies that played in drive-ins. Look at their grindhouse movies. Look at their horror movies that weren't the A-list. Because those people have to live and die on whether they can press the button that's going to make people go, what the fuck, and have to see that movie. They need to get a rise out of you. And so they are always on the pulse of what is primally bothering people. So you can see that giant bug movies aren't just giant bug movies. Obviously there's something else. So if giant bug movies can mean something, anything else can. So finding out that why is kind of exciting to me. And I find that through the podcast. It gets me writing. A lot of my writing comes from because I'm a sick motherfucker, and I'll be out walking and I'll see something that I go, I wonder what they would do if this happened instead of what just happened. And it's like, oh man, I'm torturing my fellow man. I better write that down, because someone will find that interesting. Taking a walk at night can be harrowing without being harrowing. And I have come up with great ideas just because I'm walking and there's no one else on the road and my mind wanders. And so sometimes it wanders in dark places.
Great. What are your thoughts on the relationship between horror and empathy?
Yeah, I think most of the people that I know that I relate with. Now, here's the caveat, right? Like I have a podcast called Hellbent for Horror, and I have a lot of fans, right? And I hear from some of them. The ones that I hear from are people who are like me that want to say, occasionally I hear "hey cuck" and stuff like that, but not too much, because I'm not that big. If I was bigger, then I'd have all sorts of hate mail. But I usually hear from people who are like me who go, oh, yeah, I get what you're talking about. But horror is universal. Horror is for everybody. And with that is the caveat. It's going to affect people in different ways. So there are people who will not find any empathy in this. They will find glee in this. It's unfortunate, but it's true. But I think for those who are like me, and I would say that this is a more abundant group of people than there are that go in the opposite direction. I think a large majority of people who watch these feel the empathy because they are directly driven into the story to empathize with the main character. There are some movies that make the main character the killer. And if you go, Jesus, this bothers me, that's empathy, right? Ask yourself why they wanted to put you in that spot. And that is already you're on the spot of empathy. I think deep down, we are watching these things to enrich that empathy, to find what bothers us, to find how we feel about our fellow man. I love when I find horror movies that, scare me. That's one thing. But when they have a scene I can't shake and I can get angry at them. Even now, I can get angry at a movie for giving me. I just read a book called American Rapture, and it has a scene in there. I mean, it's a great book, and it's about essentially like a pandemic. And you're like, oh God, pandemic! But it's really about sexual revolution and religion trying to keep everybody in one mindset of what sexuality means. And so it's a disease where people start fucking themselves to death, essentially. And if you have to be really raw about it, but it's about a lot more. But there's a scene in there that they telegraph a million miles away, and they keep pulling it away from that. So you're like going, oh, it's going to be the book that doesn't do this. Great. And they save it and save it and save it. And then in the end, CJ Lead gives you that scene, and it's excruciating because normally it would just be like a page, but this goes on. She lingers in the pain that you've dreaded. So she builds up the dread that this is going to happen the entire time. And and the person lucks out every time. You're like, wow, okay, this is one of those great books where it's only going to happen to the bad people, right? But no, when it finally hits, she lingers and goes on for page after page, and you are stuck in that pain. And you have to accept it, right? There's a certain level of acceptance that happens. So I get angry. I got angry at several writers. Jack Ketchum I was angry at after reading some of his books. And I told him that. I said, yeah, Girl Next Door, exactly. Girl Next Door. I told him that.
As soon as you said the name, I'm like, I know. Yeah. I know.
Yeah. When I met him, I said, it's great that we met years later. I said, because there was a time when I was going to punch you. He said, you wouldn't believe how many times I've heard that. And so, there are authors and their books that because of where they go, they hurt me, right? And instead of me saying this is the worst person in the world, I instead feel that empathy, that I realize that what they did is they let me know that I still have blood flowing in my body, and that there are things that bother me, and that I am worried about humanity. We can feel cynical in this world, and comedy can help in that way, and I think horror can help as well, where we I don't want to watch a movie where a bunch of people raid Congress, right, and try to take over the building. But I'll watch a zombie movie that they're doing that, or werewolves, So there is this thing of I release the pain that I can't figure a way to release. And horror does that by being the metaphor and the allegory for everything. And the same movie can be an allegory and metaphor for multiple different types of viewpoints. The twain may not meet, but it's still a release. So for me, empathy is huge. I don't think I could watch or enjoy horror films or read horror novels if I didn't have concern for my fellow man, because then there's no risk, right? Yeah. And I don't understand the people who read and are like, yeah, that was fucking awesome, just laughing and chuckling all the way through. I don't understand that. It seems like a lot of empty calories.
As I decide which question to ask next.
The calorie part at the end, it's just like, oh. This again, I can't. This is why when we talk about you, when you come up in conversation on our show, this is the reason why, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't caught on yet, this is why. It's like when you drop it with a line like empty calories, it's like it all just click. It goes all kind of false line. Side note, warning, don't read The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. Like, it's a great book. It's a fantastic read, but oh man, is it dark. It is so dark.
Yeah. I talked to him.
Know what you're getting into when you get it. When you pick that book up.
When I met him, I didn't know he was dying of cancer. Obviously, he kept it hidden from everybody. But I saw him at a very small convention. Well, it's not small, but it's like 2,000 people. That's pretty small for major conventions. But it's one I go to all the time, Cinema Wasteland in Cleveland. And they had Ketchum there. And he was probably less than a year from being dead. And I rode with him from the airport to the hotel in an old Holiday Inn van. And it was just us. It was raining, and I started talking to him, and we had this great conversation because he's originally from Pennsylvania. I'm originally from Pennsylvania. His real name is Dallas Marr. And I was like saying, you used to be a bartender and stuff. And he goes, oh yeah. So he's really, really personable. And I told him, I said, I'm so glad you had that woman fall down the stairs and break her neck in that book, because if she had gotten away with everything without anything happening, I don't know if I could believe in you as a human being. He's like, yeah, I needed to do that. And I said, and the one I can't read is Red, because I know that the whole book's about killing a dog, and I can't kill a dog.
I can't bring myself.
Yeah. And so this is politically incorrect. He looked at me and he said, don't be a pussy, read the damn book. So he gave me the book. And I read it over the weekend. He saw me sitting in a corner reading the book, and he goes, "It's good, isn't it?" So it was very funny. And the death of the dog is like that. And that's what's interesting about the approach to something like that, that comes from someone like Ketchum, that is known for this kind of thing. It's like a Band-Aid tear off, and you're left with an empty feeling. Like it's like finding out that somebody just died, and you're just with that hollow, cold feeling in the stomach. And then C.J. Lead, who takes situations and releases it very incrementally over a long period of time. And it's just two really great approaches to the same kind of thing. And now I've dominated the fucking conversation. I can't remember what the question was.
You're the guest. Like... Yeah. You're supposed to dominate the conversation. Like, that's how this works.
And that's kind of the point, right?
Yeah. Daddy Dom here. I can't remember.
Yes, because everything goes back to wrestling.
Indeed. I do have more questions. However, we are running out of time. So if you wanted to talk about your works in progress, or anything that you have coming up, like, now would be the time.
Sure. So I do have another story that's going to be in an anthology, and I think the anthology is going to be more relevant now than it was just a few weeks ago. It's called Horror Goes Punk, and it's a bunch of writers, some really big writers all together. We were given the assignment of you can write a story. It has to be named after a punk song. So pick your
Oh.
band and pick your song and then write your story. And so I ended up with the Dead Kennedys' Let's Lynch the Landlord, and which is an alliteration thing. Let's lynch the landlord. And to show you how crazy things are, I live in the Bay Area, and a place that maybe people don't remember now, but was once a huge thing called People's Park. It was a place where they took University of Berkeley, had taken land from housing, domain, and they were going to put in like a tennis court and shit like that, and they did nothing with it. They just let it be fallow, and then a bunch of students and hippies decided to go in there and plant and turn it into a garden, and they said, fuck that, you got to get off. And there was this huge riot that happened in like 1969, and Ronald Reagan, who was the governor of California at that time, brought in the National Guard, shot a bunch of people, tear gassed the entire town. The gas went through the air and sickened a bunch of kids in elementary schools nearby, all this shit. And People's Park was held by the people until this year. And the state Supreme Court said, nah, you're no longer going to be able to do any of this. It is land that is owned by the university. And so the university, in its wisdom, knowing that there's going to be protests, even though it's very weakened now, and quite honestly, the place was overtaken by homelessness, and there was a dangerous element that had lifted in there. But there's also Freedom Stage there, where people from the Civil Rights March would stand there and give free speeches, right? All this stuff. They had food for the poor coming out of this place. And what the city and the university did is they took storage containers, those big containers that you see on ships. They stacked them 3 high and surrounded the entire city block of People's Park so no one could get in. So they basically made the Berlin Wall in the United Republic of Berkeley. And so I decided to write a story about it, and had the old ghosts, all the old punk ghosts and all the old ghosts decide it's time to just kill. We're going to free this place for once and for all. So I did this story, and it's going to be out in March. I don't know, I have an exact date, but March of 2025. There's going to be, I think there's like 25 stories in it, and some are going to be, there's just going to be some really great stories. I'm really happy with that story. I was able to tell the story of a friend. He's one of the characters that's in there. He died of cancer a couple of years ago, one of the biggest punk rockers I know. And a couple other people who I know who are former environmentalists, former advocates, former comic book artists that are now homeless, that are living on the hills of Oakland. And I decided I could tell their story through this thing. So there's a lot going on in that story. Whether anybody likes it or not, it's punk rock. Who gives a fuck? So there's that. I've got a series of short stories that I'm compiling. It's going to be called This Will Hurt You More Than It Hurts Me is the name of the anthology. And there will be a couple stories that will be in there that are no longer available in the books that they were originally published in, are no longer available, and some new stories. So there's that kind of thing. I'll be doing different conventions through the year. I usually do about a dozen of them. We'll see what the dates are. Everything's pretty tentative right now. Who knows what 2025 is going to be like. So I'm just where I am on that. And that's pretty much it. Hellbent for Horror is going to continue, and I'll continue to write weird erotic poetry under the name of Joffrey Profound. And hey, and Screaming for Pleasure is the book that's out now. I also have a second book that's going to be coming out next year. That's nonfiction. It's called Defenders of the Faith, How Horror Will Save the World One Fan at a Time. We'll see how good that is. But it's going to be more of a look at why horror is so important in people's lives, what fandom has brought to the culture, and why we like certain things that people don't quite understand. Of course, it's all personal opinion, and it's also me looking at different films and giving an understanding of why these things are important. But for the most part, it really is more of a look at how horror is the punk rock of cinema, how it is the great egalitarian art form, that there is no real stage, just like punk rock. There's no stage between the audience and the band. And tomorrow the audience might be the band. And so fans are what draw more strength to the genre than anything else, where we are somewhat put in a corner by the rest of the literary world. We self-perpetuate our own publicity with our friends and our fans, and the idea that anybody that is welcome to write is allowed to write is one of the things that I think is great. There's a very grassroots thing to it, and horror is evergreen. So I'm going into all of that kind of thing, trying to make a persuasive argument on how we just fucking started playing around a little bit more in the fantasy of what worries us instead of actually, you know, trying to legislate against what worries us. We might be doing a little bit better.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a marvelous conversation. And,
as always, sir.
As
Thank
always.
you so much. It's always
joy. I'll be sure to put links to all your stuff in the show notes and stuff like that. And
Great.
hopefully we'll keep in touch.
Yes, please. It's always a pleasure getting to speak with you folks. And that's one of the reasons I'll go to Kentucky. I'll go to Louisville to hang out with folks that are fun. And of course, what is that ridiculous Halloween store, Caulfield's? It's another big draw. That's just insane, that place. But yeah, it's very, one of the great pleasures of doing conventions and stuff is that I have convention family. I find people who are like me that I like, and we get to have I had to have friendships and families where I didn't have friendships and families. And I think a lot of people have to find their own family because things are tough with their blood one. So I find that this is one of the great benefits of being on the road.
Is finding your found family. Yeah,
exactly.
We are the tribe, man. We are a tribe.
Yeah.
And next time there'll be ice cream.
And
there will always be ice cream.
Ice cream in Halloween stores. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that sounds great. And who knows, some terribly off color thing that will make someone blush. That will also be a great thing.
Yes. I'll have to work on something.
Oh, yay.
All right.
Thanks to your audience as well. Grateful out there.
Let's see. That wraps up our podcast today. If you like this video at any point, I encourage you to hit the like button. And if you want to see more interviews, more tutorials, more all of that stuff, you might want to subscribe and maybe even ring that bell on the off chance that YouTube actually notifies you when we go live. You know, maybe. And hit the buttons. And we will catch you guys on the flip side.